Good day, and welcome to this special broadcast presented by the Virgin Islands Studies Institute at the H. Laverty Stout Community College. My name is Rochelle Smith, and I currently serve as the Institute's director. As we mark Heroes and Foreparents Day 2025, we take this moment to honor the legacy of those whose vision, service, and leadership have helped to shape the Virgin Islands into the community that we cherish today. In this program, we are pleased to share a meaningful conversation with two distinguished members of our community, as well as members of the Frederick Pickering Memorial Foundation, Attorney Dancia Penn, KC, and Dr. Michael E. O'Neill. Through their reflections, we'll explore the Frederick Pickering Memorial Foundation's work and the lasting impact of their contributions, both within the organization and throughout their own professional journeys. We invite you to listen in, reflect, and celebrate with us as we continue to preserve and promote the stories that define the Virgin Islands heritage. Thank you for joining us. Attorney Penn, Dr. O'Neill, thank you very much for joining me today.
Pleasure.
It's a pleasure.
We want to spend some time today talking about Frederick Augustus Pickering, the foundation that was named in his honor, your work in that organization, and your own professional journeys. I think a good place to start would be a question that we get a lot at the Virgin Islands Studies Institute. Who was Frederick Pickering? So Dr. O'Neill, can you help us to answer that question? Who was Frederick Pickering?
Well, thank you. Let me begin by noting that the Frederick Pickering Memorial Foundation was the brainchild of the late Dr. Norwell Harrigan. As it turns out, we know very little about Frederick Augustus Pickering. We know that he was born in 1835 and he died in 1926. But the details of the man and his character remain shrouded in history. But let me begin, therefore, by reading a statement that was drafted by Dr. Harrigan and which we read at each annual lecture. And I quote from Dr. Harrigan's characterization. And he begins, he says, as strange as it may seem, we still know very little about Frederick Augustus Pickering. From the burial records at St. George's Church, we know that he was born in 1835, but we have not been able to discover the exact date of his birth, since the records of that period have, like him, returned to dust. His early life is still shrouded in more or less mystery, but it is clear that at some time he was recruited to civil service, where he attained the rank of clerk to the president. With the establishment of the Leeward Islands as a single federal colony, the office of president was reduced in status. The holder ceased to be the direct representative of the crown and was appointed instead by a commission from the governor with the approval of this colonial office in London. The president therefore became the representative of the governor. In 1884, when there were less than 50 English residents, and with economic conditions rapidly deteriorating, Frederick Augustus Pickering was appointed to the office of president, perhaps in the circumstances only temporarily, in which he retained until 1887. After his successor, as head of the local government, was again selected from the British colonial service, Pickering apparently reverted to his former position as clerk. In 1898, he was named a nominated member of the Legislative Council, a position he apparently retained until the council breathed its last on 24th March 1902. He subsequently served as nominated member of the Executive Council and was honored by the King by being allowed to retain the title Honorable for his life, the rest of his life. He died on 15 January 1926 and was laid to rest in St. George's Churchyard. We believe that his gravesite lies under the chapel dedicated to St. Ursula, which was subsequently added to the church. So that's pretty much as we know of Frederick Augustus Pickering. There is mention of him briefly in the history written by Dr. Harrigan and co-authored by Dr. Pearl Valak. There's also brief mention in the history written by Vernon Pickering, who, by the way, would have been an ancestral, Frederick Augustus Pickering would have been an ancestral relative of Vernon Pickering, who, as you know, was the publisher of the Island Sun, or is the publisher of the Island Sun. He also is mentioned in the history of the British Virgin Islands written by the historian Dr. Isaac Ducan. But all of those mentions are very brief and certainly contain less than I just conveyed as shared with us by Dr. Harrigan himself.
Yes, and I think that even though it seems scant, is a lot more than many of our young people in our community may be aware of who Frederick Pickering was. So I thank you for that.
Surely.
So the Frederick Pickering Memorial Foundation, named in his honor, came to be in 1986, I think I've read.
Actually, it was founded legally in 1984.
Okay.
The original trustees were Dr. Harrigan himself, of course, Dr. Pearl Valak, Mr. Audley Maduro, myself, and attorney Dancia Penn. The board was subsequently expanded to include Mr. Elton Georges, Mrs. Myrna Flax Christopher, and later on Mr. Elton, Tony Harrigan, the son of Dr. Noel Harrigan.
Yes.
With that expanded board, that expanded system of governance, Tony Harrigan was appointed executive director, and I continued to serve as chairman of the foundation.
Why was the foundation created? What were its objectives?
Well, the raison d'etre of the foundation was, broadly speaking, to conduct research on Virgin Islands social and historical issues, to hold lectures, and to support research in the areas of history and Virgin Islands society. In carrying out that mission, central to it was the annual lecture which it developed, the Frederick Pickering Memorial Foundation annual lecture, which always took place in January, in keeping with the date of the formal inauguration of the foundation, which was the 15th of January, 1986.
Thank you. And I know, Ms. Penn, that you were very instrumental, especially in one lecture putting on and making the contacts and making possible a lecture in 2002, and you can correct me, with Sir Dennis Byron. But please tell us about your work with the foundation, that lecture included, because I'm intrigued by it.
Thank you very much, Rochelle. And before I respond to what you have asked me, I would like to begin by commending you and commending this institute on this initiative.
Thank you.
I consider, and I know that Michael agrees, that it is an extremely important thing to do, and we hope and trust, and we are confident that this part of the celebration for the upcoming Heroes and Forefathers Day will redound to the benefit of our community and our peoples.
Thank you.
Actually, my involvement started, I didn't even know that the foundation existed. But I was a very young lawyer in the 80s. I was formally called to the bar here in 1981. And one day I received a telephone call from a very distinguished gentleman who in fact had presented me to the bar. He had moved my application for admission to the bar, Mr. Macwelling Todman, who was the first Virgin Islander to be appointed King's Counsel. We all called him Mac affectionately. And he, in fact, was at that time one of the trustees of the foundation. And he called me and said, look, he was one of my mentors. And he called me and said, look, lawyers have a social duty, and their role is not only to practice law. And I believe that you would be a fit and proper person to become a trustee of the Frederick Pickering Memorial Foundation. And of course I said yes. I was very honored to have been thought of and to have been invited. And I can't recall the date, but it was certainly in the 80s when I was invited to become a trustee. And it was a tremendous experience for me. It really helped me a lot as a young individual, a young Virgin Islander, to sit together at the table. As I recall it, Mike, we used to meet on Friday mornings.
That's right.
At Mac's office there on Main Street. It was really a privilege for me to sit with who were great men, and a great woman of the day, Dr. Pearl Varlack. She had been my history teacher in high school, and we maintained a very close relationship up to the time of her death. But it was an honor for me and a privilege and great exposure to sit at the table with people of the caliber of Mr. McWilling Todman King's Counsel, Dr. Pearl Varlack, and the Venerable Dr. Norwell Harrigan. So I do think that Dr. Harrigan is really one of the many unsung heroes of our Virgin Islands. And just in reading over the weekend, I went back to the book that was published on the occasion of, well, on behalf of Mr. P.C. Scott, and also a book which we helped author, my classmates and I, in 1967, when we were commemorating the 25th anniversary of secondary education in the Virgin Islands. And there is a lot in that that I think can be crystallized and really ought to be known about Dr. Harrigan. He was, at one point in time, the title then was Secretary to the Government. I believe it's today's equivalent would be the Deputy Governor. Although the nomenclature has changed, but the role would have been that which the Deputy Governor plays. He was Chief Education Officer. He was a member of the faculty of the first secondary school in the Virgin Islands, which, as you know, was opened in 1943. My own mother, Una Davies Penn, was a member of that first class, and she often talked about being taught by Dr. Harrigan. And in addition to that, Dr. Harrigan, he didn't just remain a public servant and a teacher. He went ahead and went into academia, earned a PhD, and did a lot of historical research and writing. And sadly, I don't know to what extent his books are available, but I have one or two. There's the Virgin Islands Story, which he co-authored with Dr. Varlack.
Yes.
And there's another little one called Ye Virgin Islands, I think is the name.
Yes.
So that Dr. Harrigan would come up with the idea and that he would conceive creating the Frederick Pickering Foundation, I think, is an indelible contribution which he has made and which we ought to celebrate.
I agree.
Interestingly, and I didn't know this, but I also learned on the weekend in my readings that it was the national motto Vigilate, and it was the motto of the school I went to, the Virgin Islands Secretary School, Vigilate, Dr. Harrigan was in fact the public official who had to seek and obtain from the College of Heralds in the UK approval for us to adopt that motto of Vigilate. It's amazing, and we really ought to know more about him, and not just him, Dr. Pearl Varlack, and many others who really laid a foundation for us for today. It's just that we're not, in my view, not always building or not building sufficiently on that foundation.
I would agree with you, and part of the work in Virgin Islands Studies Institute is to do just what you're saying, to bring these persons to the fore and the work that they have done, to bring your work, what you have contributed to the community as well. Because I don't believe in speaking with students and colleagues, it's not that we don't want to know, it's that the information may not be accessible. And one of the things I want to help with my colleagues is to get the information out there. And this conversation is one of our strategies in bringing that about.
A very highly commendable goal.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for helping us to achieve that goal.
At any time.
Thank you.
Sure.
So what stands out in your memory in your work with the Frederick Pickering Memorial Foundation? Are there any specific lectures, any contributions, anything that happened in your work with the foundation that stands out to you as particularly impactful? I'd love for both of you to answer that.
May I start, Mike?
Sure, by all means.
Several things. It's important to say that we had the age-old story. We did not have funding. But we thought that one of the very important contributions that we could make would be to inaugurate a lecture series. And in thinking about today and our presentation, our interview with you, Rochelle, I found myself remarking, my word, what great vision it was that we inaugurated that lecture series. I do not know the final number, but it was at least 24 lectures, public lectures, that I think we hosted. As Mike said, we did it every year. We aim to do it every year. And we selected the 17th of January or the date, was it the 17th or the 15th? The 15th of January or the date closest to that. Because although we didn't know the date of the birth of Frederick Pickering, the date of his death was certain. So annually we did that. We started off by inviting people in. I remember we had people like Dr. Dion Phillips come in from the College of the University of the Virgin Islands. I think it was then still the College of the Virgin Islands. People like him came in. But of course, funding was an issue. You know, you don't invite speakers and tell them to pay your way and pay your hotel. So we had, in the beginning, a range of speakers. I don't recall all of the names. I think you have a list, but not a complete list. Right. But then we had a number of very important Virgin Islanders who gave those annual lectures. And some of what strikes me about those lectures was how visionary they were, and how much a lot of what is under very active discussion in the community today was actually raised in those lectures. Many of the subjects, my friend and colleague, now acting Justice of the Court of Appeal, Gerard Ferraro, he spoke a lot about the Constitution and governance in one of his lectures. Sir Dennis Byron, and I'll tell you a little more about his lecture in a bit. Sir Dennis Byron, who at the time was the Chief Justice of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, and went on to have a very distinguished global career as a lawyer and as a judge. He very much recognized the value of the foresight that those who established the Frederick Pickering Memorial Foundation had, and commended our efforts to the rest of the region. In a minute, I'll read a little bit of what he said for you, but I'll give Mike a chance.
Well, I would go back to the raison d'etre of the establishment of the foundation. And I think, although he never said so explicitly, I think that fundamental to Dr. Harrigan's reason for founding this entity was precisely because, and choosing Frederick Augustus Pickering, was precisely because so little was known of him. And as it turns out, that remains the case. But the foundation over the years did as much as was possible by holding these lectures, by trying to make the public aware of the significance of a Virgin Islander who still remains significant but relatively unknown. Now, with respect to the lecture series, since Dr. Harrigan and Dr. Varlack were at the University of the Virgin Islands, previously the college when it first began, we were able to draw on the resources of the university, so that early on, many of the lectures were delivered by members of the faculty of UVI, so that Attorney Penn mentioned one such lecturer, Dion Phillips, who was an expert in Caribbean fortifications and the history of forts in military history in the Caribbean. Early on, also, we had a lecture delivered by the economist, Dr. Simon Jones Hendrickson. Early on, also, or at some point, we had a lecture by Dr. Carlisle Corbin, who was not at the university, but was known regarding his work with the USVI representation at the UN, and subsequently, of course, he's done work here in that regard. So that I think also what is important to recognize was, given the difficulty in documenting some of these things, Dr. Valak made sure that for every lecture, she made sure that she had in hand a hard copy of the lecture. I had a few, I kept a few myself, but as life and luck would have it, after Dr. Valak retired and moved to New York and illness ensued, and when she passed away, most of those lectures which she had, which was virtually copies of all of them, are no longer with us. The lectures, the copies that I had, all also went the way of all things with Hurricane Irma, when my roof at the house was damaged. But because Vernon Pickering, as publisher of the Island Sun, given his relationship with the family relationship with Pickering, Frederick Augustus Pickering, and given also the fact that at that time the Island Sun was really the only publication, newspaper being published, he ensured that at least there were stories on each lecture. And we're hoping that we can at least resuscitate and gain access to those. You'll find that whilst there may be mention of some of these lectures online, when you try to access them, the links are no longer live.
And I thank you for that information, because it gives us a place to go digging to see what we can find. If we cannot find the scripts for the lectures, at least the information about who was giving the lecture and maybe the topic or whatever the story that would have been published in the Island Sun.
May I also mention that the early lectures were held largely, I believe, Dancia, that actually the very first ones may have been held in the old Methodist Church Hall, which was the place that many such things were given.
Yes, I had forgotten that.
Subsequent to that, the venue was shifted to the Treasure Isle Conference Room. Treasure Isle Conference Room was a small building, wooden building.
Which wooden steps. I remember walking up those steps.
Indeed, which was apart from the hotel proper, and which trustee Audley Maduro always accessed. He always took charge of ensuring we had somewhere. And it was through him that we had the Treasure Isle Conference Room. With the advent and creation of
I think we used to pay $25.
Or
something like that.
Wow.
I
For
remember.
use of the
For
space.
use of the
Yes.
space.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yes. And then after that, of course, with the advent and creation of the college, we were able to move the lectures up here. And then, of course, later when I joined the college, that was solidified and sort of quasi-institutionalized. In 2015, the foundation took a decision to wind up its affairs. And pursuant to that decision and discussions with the college, given the fact that the lectures had for a long time by then been taking place here, then President Dr. Carl Dawson indicated his interest in ensuring that the lecture series would continue as a part of the college's offerings. And so I think in one way or another that has been the case.
And may I just say this, the decision that was taken in 2015 was not a decision that was taken out of any view that the work of the foundation was no longer important. The reality was that time passed. Several of the persons involved either died or were ill. Energies ran low, and we thought that the fair and the right and the viable decision was to have the college assume the responsibility. And in fact, Mike shared with me last week, as we were discussing today, emails saying that we are handing it over to the college. So we hope that the college and you, through this institute, will really take up that baton and reinstitute the lecture series. But before we leave the lectures and what stand out, I wanted to just say a little more. We had, and I wish I could find it, I know I had a copy of it, as indeed I had copies of several of the lectures But as Mike has said, many of us lost a lot of important, the country lost a lot of important material with the hurricanes of 2017. But Wesley Mathavius, who is the older sister of the recently departed Dr. Robert Mathavius, she one year gave an extremely important lecture. I can't recall what year it was.
2015, according to the records.
2015. But I remember how very different it was, how very innovative and salient the points were that she made. And I think it would be a credit to the college and to the community, because part of the purpose has to be for those to come.
Yes.
It would be very important to have a lecture.
Yes.
And I can't remember exactly what form it took, but I found a note somewhere that we actually in 1996 honored in some form, it wouldn't have been a lecture, but Mrs. Clementine Smith from Salt Island.
Oh.
Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. I mean,
I don't remember the details,
yes,
but
that's right.
she was one of our most venerable souls. And for many years, she was from Salt Island, and for many years, she took care of the burial ground.
Yes.
On Salt Island. If you've been to Salt Island, you know that burial ground. Sailors from the Wreck of the Rhone.
Yeah.
And not only did she receive an award from the Queen for her community service and her cultural preservation, but we of the Frederick Pickering Memorial Foundation honored her. From what I read, it was in 1996. So there were some very important things done. And they ought not to be forgotten. They really ought to be built on.
Yes. And that's one of the aims of Virgin Islands Studies Institute, to respect that heritage and to carry it on, because it's important work, and in many ways what we aim to do aligns with what the Frederick Pickering Memorial Foundation did. So I pledge to continue that important work. And I hadn't heard of that, that way that you celebrated Miss Clementine Smith. I've seen, I think there's an image of her on Salt Island, and that's my only knowledge of her.
She was featured on the front cover of the Welcome magazine many years ago.
Okay.
But she was a very distinguished lady.
Yes.
I happen to know her and remember her.
Another person and another area for research within Virgin Islands Studies. So
absolutely, and Salt Island.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I promised to say what Sir Dennis had said
Yes.
about the foundation. If it's very brief, and with your indulgence, I'll read it. He said that in the Caribbean, our historical focus has more often been extraterritorial. Our identification of heroes and achievers, and our confidence in the development of our history, philosophy, landmarks, culture, or even our jurisprudence has been stymied by this focus on the external. Everyone agrees that this should be corrected, but we do not always seem to have the will to take the steps which are necessary to achieve the necessary focus. He went on to say, it is against this background that the work of the Frederick Pickering Memorial Foundation is praiseworthy.
Yes. Yes, so that's
I
what you
thought that
mentioned.
was very sage
Yes.
and very wise, coming from a person like Sir Dennis, who is still alive and well. In fact, I had a very happy evening at his home in June in St. Lucia.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. Very much. How would you say as we transition a little bit, unless there's further you want to say about the Memorial Foundation, how did your professional journey impact what you did with the foundation? And then we can talk a little bit more about your individual and very important contributions to the Virgin Islands that we live in today. How would you see your work as an anthropologist, as a higher education administrator, and many other things, Dr. O'Neill, impact the work that you did with the foundation?
Well, let me say that, again, as I started out saying earlier, the creation and idea behind the foundation was very much the brainchild of Dr. Harrigan in particular. Dr. Harrigan was a family friend. I mean, I knew him from childhood. As I grew, and as he moved from public service here to the university in particular, he first worked as the associate director of an entity at the then College of the Virgin Islands called the Caribbean Research Institute, under the directorship of Dr. Edward Toll. I mentioned Dr. Toll because when we talk about more about my own professional journey, both Dr. Toll and Dr. Harrigan were crucial, played central roles, if you will, in my development. After Dr. Toll stepped down as the director of the Caribbean Research Institute, Dr. Harrigan assumed the directorship. And it was while he served as director that he sort of continued to encourage my own engagement. And in fact, since I was here and not in academia at the time, he afforded me, he appointed me what he termed at the time a research associate of the Institute. That gave me, if you will, an affiliation with an academic institution. And through that, I was able to maintain connection with the ongoing work that he was spearheading at the Institute. I go back to a point that also that Attorney Penn mentioned, and that is that how important it is and how sad it is really that people as important as Dr. Harrigan, even in his case, we know so little about him at this point. In thinking about that, one of the things that struck me is that he lived and worked and passed away. We were discussing this. My recollection is in 1990. That was before, 1990 was before the advent and importance and ubiquity of social media, the online news media, so that if it were not in print, that is in the newspapers, it's not there, and so much has been lost. Dr. Harrigan was instrumental. One of his key focuses was in the development of what he called microstate studies. In fact, while he was director of the Caribbean Research Institute, he developed or launched a journal of microstate studies, which continued to publish until shortly before his death. And the point of the focus of that was that he argued that there's a difference between microstates, the smaller countries, the smaller states such as we are, and bigger entities. And it was a mistake to, as he put it, to ape the development issues that were relevant perhaps to larger countries. Later on, as it turns out, as I pursued my own research, I began to see the importance of a related concept, which was termed related to the other Caribbean. The other Caribbean was a notion developed by an anthropologist named Ulf Hannertz. And similar to Dr. Harrigan's notion of microstates, Hannertz felt that there's a small category of Caribbean countries which, through their historical marginality agriculturally, Cayman Islands, Anguilla, BVI, a few others, they never resuscitated after the demise of sugar. They all have carved out similar paths of development, this other Caribbean, which Hannertz calls other Caribbean, and that's the term that I began to use, but it is closely related to Dr. Harrigan's notion of microstate studies. All of these countries have pursued similar paths of development. High-end tourism, and latterly financial services. So there's that connection also, that in a sense Dr. Harrigan was prescient in his work on microstate studies and what has happened with this other Caribbean subsequently.
That's also brilliant and so well said, and absolutely true, absolutely true. And I think what Mike has just said, Dr. Neal has just said about Dr. Harrigan's academic work is also a credit to these Virgin Islands.
Indeed.
And part of what should give us the confidence and a strong sense of value and self-value, because it is the fundamentals of the education system right here,
Yes.
which produced and nurtured a man, and of course he went abroad after his retirement and went into academia in the US and in the US Virgin Islands. But the foundations were laid here. And it is an example of what we have been able to produce. And you rarely see so much of the whole microstates point of view and philosophy, if I could call it that, in what's happening with our financial services, in what's happening with our tourism, indeed, even in what's happening with climate change. Because a lot of the issues are unique to islands,
Yes.
and particularly unique to small islands.
Yes. Yes.
So we have for a long time been playing a big role in that whole big space.
Yes.
It's just that we don't sufficiently recognize it, and we don't know it sufficiently.
And that is going to change. I hope to be a part of the change, because to now learn that this type of discourse was taking place and it was being studied, and we were having conversations about how our unique positioning as small islands, microstates, the other Caribbean, how we interacted with the rest of the world, to know that these conversations were happening at that level.
And the writings were being done, the
Yes.
literature was being created.
Yes, and how much of that now we see manifesting in the world in which we live, what was written about and talked about, and we need to build on it. Let's continue the conversations. But a lot of us just don't know that that this discourse was taking place. So I am thanking you for what you're sharing with me today, that we can take and build on as we go forward.
Another important contribution of Dr. Harrigan was his work on what he called, what was named the Inter-Virgin Islands Conference.
That's right.
He had this notion of a greater Virgin
That's
Islands.
right.
And he did important work on that during several years, and it was particularly fruitful during the governorship period of Alexander Farley,
Yes.
in whom he found a kindred spirit, in a sense. Unfortunately, it ended with, eventually, with energy runs out. Farley passed away. Subsequent governors were not particularly as interested. And of course, ultimately and subsequently, Dr. Harrigan himself left us. But that was an important creation, and it's an important entity that, at least historically, was there.
Yes, it was there, and in my own career, and you asked about the impact, I don't remember the way you put the question, but it prompts me to speak now as a lawyer. And Mike's mention of the Inter-Virgin Islands, what was it called?
Conference.
The Inter-Virgin Islands Conference. Because when I became Attorney General here in 1992, there was still in existence at least fragments of that Inter-Virgin Islands Conference. The Friendship Day celebrations, which are still ongoing happily, they are part of that.
Arose from it.
But in terms of the legal framework, we had, and I remember annually, regular meetings with counterparts in the U.S. Virgin Islands, the Attorney General, the senior law enforcement people, great cooperation, and in fact it became institutionalized. I don't know I believe that there is still today some degree of cooperation on the law enforcement level, but that vision that Dr. Harrigan had, and that it was given life and existed for some time. I think our relationships would have been even stronger had we continued to have that Inter-Virgin Islands Council and Conference grow. I think Mr. Penn, Howard Penn, also had a lot to do with that, if my memory serves me.
I don't recall, but you're probably right. Yes.
I know of Friendship Day, and by the time our conversation is shared, we would have just celebrated Friendship Day in St. Thomas. But this Greater Virgin Islands Conference is something about which I have to do some research and learn a little bit more, because it seems to be far greater than the celebration that we would have every year. It was more an ongoing relationship, as you mentioned, with counterparts.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes. So.
I experienced that over many years as Attorney General.
And I think Dr. Harrigan conceived of the Inter-Virgin Islands Conference as a potential model for sub-colonial cooperation, if you will. You had the U.S. as the colonial power, the U.K. as the colonial power in our case, but there was the possibility, he felt, and actually was able to achieve it, of cooperation at the
Sub-region, well, sub-regional isn't quite the word, but at the level of our
Sub-imperial.
islands. Yeah. Sorry?
I said sub-imperial level.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
Some great contributions by Dr. Norwell Harrigan that are definitely worthy of some further excavating and sharing within our community.
Yes. His son, Elton Tony Harrigan, was married to my aunt, Dr. Bernie Harrigan. In fact, Tony became a trustee of the foundation later in its life. But Tony sadly passed away very recently. But he did his best as well to take up the mantle of his father.
Thank you. Transitioning now to your own, because the part of the text for this broadcast, this program, is honoring our heroes, our foreparents, and our living pillars. I consider both of you living pillars of the Virgin Islands. You've done important work with the Frederick Pickering Memorial Foundation, but in your individual careers, you have done monumental things, my term. And I would love for you to share. There may be college students who may be seeing this. They may have heard of Dr. Michael O'Neill, Attorney Dancia Penn. Can you share with us highlights from your professional journeys? And there'll be more I'll ask about, but let's start there, please.
That's a very difficult one for me, Rochelle. I have had an extremely fulfilling life and career, and I am still very active and plan to remain very active. And as you know, I have done a number of different things in the course of my life. I taught at what was then the BVI High School. It's now the Elmore Stout High School. I practiced very actively as a lawyer and still do for many, many years. I have been in government, in appointed positions as well as in elected positions. And I've been a judge on an acting appointment on the Court of Appeal and so on. And the center of all of what I have done has been people. And my fundamental view that as stewards, and I think I'm a steward,
I agree.
as stewards, we have a duty to leave this place that we have found better, and to do what we can to help to make it better. So people have always been very much at the center of what I have done. To this day, I still have good and enduring relationships with people, and they're now grown men. Some of them are my age, actually, who I taught in the short time that I taught history and Spanish at the then BVI High School. And I treasure that, and I treasure those relationships. And every once in a while, somebody would say to me, oh, you know, I don't ever forget that you told me to do so and so. Or I might meet somebody in the supermarket or wherever, and they'll introduce me to a friend, and they'll say, you know, this is the lady who said so and so. And that means a lot to me, because I believe that it is very important to help to change lives and help to improve lives to people. In my legal career, it's been very varied. It's been very interesting. I have worked with and for people from all over the globe. And I am proud of the fact that I continue with all the other clients that I have and with all the other work that I have done, even up to the level of the Privy Council. I still continue to work for local families.
Yes.
And that, I think that's very important socially, and it's very important to me as a person. I mentor a lot. I do not have any formal mentorship schemes or programs, but I believe I'm known to be approachable, and I always try whenever I can to assist and guide and provide support. I mean, I could say a lot more, but perhaps I should give Mike a chance to. In government, I haven't spoken about that, but I am very proud of the contributions which I made in the various capacities that I served in the government. As Attorney General, I had a responsibility for a lot of the legislation and a lot of the legal infrastructure, preparing and providing for and seeing to the enactment of a lot of the legislation that forms the basis of today's financial services industry. Robert Mathavius and I worked so closely together, and I've said that in my tribute to him. We worked so closely together on what really were the foundations of creating today's financial services sector. Obviously, there's growth and there's change, and the whole world and the whole world economy have changed. But the foundations were laid, and the foundations are there. And it is those foundations that have helped to take the BVI to the place that it is. We're in the H. Lavity Stout room, and I see so many pictures of Mr. Stout all around. And working with him was a very interesting time. And we did a lot with him to help to promote this country globally. The United States, Hong Kong, Asia. So there was that, and I think that has been an important contribution to the development of our country. As a elected representative, that's a very different world, and that's a very different challenge. But I am very proud of the fact that I was able to serve, having been elected, I was able to serve in the House and be credible and kept my slate clean there, and also as a member of the executive in the government, Deputy Premier and Minister, to make important contributions. Some of them, for example, in relation to health, because I was at one time the Minister of Health and Social Development and Gender, and we were able to do very important things that again are important in the building of the infrastructure of the country.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. O'Neill.
Well, let me go back to Dr. Harrigan as I talk about my own journey. I mentioned early on that there were two people at the university who impacted me in that regard, and they were Dr. Edward Toll and Dr. Harrigan. Toll as director initially, and Harrigan subsequently as director of the Caribbean Research Institute. As I began my journey as a postgraduate student, I had the opportunity to be involved in a research project to do with Anguilla. This was when Anguilla
The secession,
seceded,
1967,
right,
was it?
from St. Kitts. I was assigned, the research project was led by an academic by the name of William Brisk, of recently of blessed memory. He was a lawyer and a political scientist, and he was doing this research project on the Anguilla secession. And I had the good fortune to have been invited as a young, student really at that stage to be involved. I was sent to St. Thomas to do research or field work among the sizable Anguillan community in St. Thomas, which had been substantial in the support of the Anguilla Revolution, financially through,
Remittances.
Remittances and otherwise. And so it was through that undertaking that I really met and became involved with Dr. Toll, who encouraged me at that point to continue my work, and he said in anthropology, because I had decided I was going to do sociology, but he thought that anthropology would have been much better. Subsequently, of course, he was succeeded by Dr. Harrigan, who, by the way, when told, left Caribbean Research Institute and founded Island Resources Foundation. Dr. Harrigan was a member of his, actually there was a 3-member board of directors of Island Resources Foundation. Ed Toll, his wife Judith Toll, and Dr. Norwell Harrigan. So those connections continued. When I went off to do my graduate studies, I continued, of course, to benefit from the mentorship of both Toll and Harrigan. And William Brisk, who by that point was back in Boston at Harvard, continued to be a major mentor for the rest of my life, until and he was a referee in my various teaching appointments. That study, which resulted in the publication by Brisk of a book called Anguilla, Dilemma, Microstate Dilemma, I think was the title of it. Interestingly, several years later, I ended up, when I was now fully in academia, and my first appointment as a faculty member was actually at Vermont College in the master's degree program. And I ended up having as a student whose master's thesis I supervised, a man by the name of Colville Petty.
Yes, from Anguilla, I know him.
Colville Petty ended up subsequently being the deputy governor of Anguilla. When Bill Brisk, and I sort of, this is a little bit of an aside, but when Bill Brisk passed away early this year, I attempted to get a hold of Colville Petty, and I was able, to make a long story short, to reach him through Dr. Carl Dawson, who had been
of course
in Anguilla fairly
Anguilla
recently.
College,
So Dr. Dawson put me in touch with Colville Petty's daughter, who then so I wrote to her to mention the passing of our mutual friend, Dr. Brisk. But I say all that to again underscore the importance in my own journey of Dr. Norwell Harrigan, Dr. Valak as well, but particularly Dr. Harrigan. When and by the way, part of my journey was, even after having done my doctorate, I returned here to an involvement in the family business. And Dr. Harrigan was always supportive of, and in fact argued my case with the rest of the family, that is to say my parents. That
I know a little bit about that, that's why I'm laughing.
Yeah, that he needs to, you need to let him go and do what he really needs to do. And so he was always a source of support in that regard. I subsequently ended up leading a project at UVI, at Caribbean Research Institute, to do with, it was an environmental project. While I was there, the University of the West Indies decided to appoint a resident tutor, because prior to that, this would have been in 1990, the university was represented by what was termed the university representative, and the predecessor prior to my appointment as resident tutor was Dr. Charles Wheatley, which was one of the many hats he wore simultaneously at the time. So when the University of the West Indies decided to appoint a full-time resident tutor, it gave me the opportunity, before I anticipated, to leave UVI and come home, and I got the appointment as resident tutor, which I served for, I guess it was about 2 years before Dr. Wheatley sort of wooed me from across the fence and encouraged me to join him as his vice president. And so that began my career as an officer of this institution, where I served from I think it was 1991 or 92 until first for several years as vice president and subsequently as president. In terms of accomplishments at the college, I would say that having served for a long time as vice president under Dr. Wheatley. My transition to the presidency was, to a large extent, one of stewardship. Under Dr. Wheatley, he had given me a broad remit of supervision of academic programs. And so many of the programs that I had been charged with supervising and in some cases launching, such as the programs of degree programs with Wright State, the MBA program, the programs with, there were programs with UVI. There was a bachelor's degree program in nursing with State University of New York at Buffalo. Those were programs who, under Dr. Wheatley's presidency, but under my administrative supervision, were launched. And so I saw as a responsibility of stewardship carrying forward when I was appointed president. Some of the new things that I did when I became president were included the establishment of the honors program,
Phi Theta Kappa.
Phi Theta Kappa. And indeed, our current president, the current president was a beneficiary of that program. In fact, he became a certified facilitator of the leadership program offered by Phi Theta Kappa. So it's a sort of
a storied career for both of you, and I thank you both.
Well,
for
if I may, Rochelle, make a linkage between my own life and my own career and any achievements that I have had and that I may have, I think that it's important that I mention Dr. Pearl Verlack more and Mr. McTodman, King's Counsel as well. And just very briefly, Dr. Verlack was from Anegada, and very zealous, committed, brilliant woman. She was like a mother in a way to all of us. She wasn't just our teacher. But she always drilled a sentence into my little head. I would write, you'd get your question, she taught us history, you'd get your questions, you'd write your responses. And her mantra with me was always, Dancia, more detail, more detail, more detail. And that insistence on more detail has stood me very well throughout my life and throughout my career. Because now as a senior lawyer, I know that when I am writing a brief, when I'm writing submissions, and of course you learn how to manage your detail, but I have learned, and she's embroiled in me and left me with more detail, more detail. And she was, as Mike has said, integrally involved with Dr. Harrigan and all of his works, and with the Frederick Pickering Memorial Foundation. And I should also mention, because none of us achieve anything on our own. We always achieve with others and others who help us and facilitate us. And to speak of McWelling Todman as a lawyer, he had been a family friend. And in fact, his wife, Audrey, had done the bouquet for my mother when she and my father got married. And when I qualified as a lawyer, there was no if or but maybe about it. Mac was the lawyer who would present me to the bar, the lawyer who would make my application for admission. And I still remember, and of course he was not a small man, and a very strong and clear and imposing voice. I still remember him turning his back to the judge. And you know, you're never supposed to do that, but Mac could do that. Turning his back to the court and looking at me and admonishing me about the qualities and the behavior which I should have as a lawyer. But also through working with him on the Frederick Pickering Memorial Foundation, we developed a strong personal relationship and a confidence. And everybody goes through these, but I had, and I remember two in particular, I will only mention one, very difficult decisions to make as a lawyer. And they were not about the law, but they were about life and how you behave and confidence. One of the instances was, and family members are still alive, so I will not call names, but this particular young man was wanted by the police for committing a crime. And in those days, and I'm talking about the 80s, it was a very notorious crime here. And he'd run away. And I got a message one evening. I was late at the office, and I could still hear the footsteps coming up the stairs. And it was a very well-known Rasta man at the time in this country. And he came to me. It was pouring rain outside. I'll never forget it. And he says, you know, so-and-so really wants to hand himself in to the police. And he's approached me, and he's thought about it, and he said that you are the only person in whose custody he would surrender to the police. And I saw that as a big call. I was young, green around, you know, the edges, and I didn't know what to do. But I knew I could call Mac. And I knew I could go to him and speak with him in confidence, and that he would carry it to his grave. And because of the interactions with him, because they weren't just in court, but we would meet however frequently the foundation met, once a month was it, at his chambers. I had that intimacy with him, and I was able to go to him and speak with him, knowing that the conversation stayed between us, and that I was protected in any way. He advised me how to handle that situation. There was another one, but that one is even more sensitive, so I'll rest there. But through that involvement with the Frederick Pickering Memorial Foundation, to take it back to that, I was able to grow very much as a woman, to grow very much as a person, to grow as a lawyer, to be a confident public servant, and always to do my best to maintain my integrity and uphold the best values and the best virtues. So I'm grateful to have had the opportunity in my short life to have been involved, and interactions with people like my dear friend Michael O'Neill. I've learned so much through our work and our involvement on the foundation. And we should mention Audley Maduru, who is still alive, and he was for many years our treasurer, and made sure that we had no money, but such little money as it was, that we stayed on the straight and narrow and were a foundation of integrity and honesty.
Thank you both so much.
You mentioned Mac Todman, and you know, I'm afraid that I can't share the things but I mean, I always remember him, and I can remember where I had certain conversations with
him.
Mac.
Of course.
You know, the spot.
And you knew you could speak with Mac, and sometimes I think, and it's part of why nowadays, and I'm not Mac, I'll never be Mac, but it's because he had such a career. We haven't talked about that. Civil servant in the Federation and all that. But it's because sometimes I remember the things that I could go to him and discuss. That if a young lawyer calls me, I make the time. And I keep it in my breast. And I'm going to take it to my grave.
Two threads I see in both your stories: the importance of mentorship.
Absolutely.
And service to your community. And I think those are great takeaways from this conversation, both in terms of what Frederick Pickering, the man, did, what this foundation has accomplished, and what both of you have done and contributed to this community. Those are the two threads that will remain with me: mentorship and service to community. Are there any lessons or pieces of advice, or college students, we want them to look at this? What message would you like to give to our current enrollees or current college students who are trying to carve their way out in this Virgin Islands community? What would you say to them, please?
I'll defer to my academic friend.
Well, I think the importance of history, and to recognize history, to record it, and I think to advert to the lessons that it affords. I think also there's a tendency to, I mean, for all of us to become somewhat lazy in terms of looking for the history that is there. It's not always easy. But if you're interested, let me use a little anecdote. I remember a couple of years ago, about 2 years ago, a young man in the community on social media began to talk about my book on BVI social history. And he began to share certain excerpts from it, and I became engaged with him on it. And the interesting thing I found is that people who interacted with what he was sharing from my book, the tendency was to express interest in the names of people. You know, can I find out more about my parents or grandparents, which is good, but that's not all. That's not all the history teaches us.
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
I mean, there are lessons to learn from history, and I think, as we begin to conclude, I think that we are again at an inflection point today in the history of the Virgin Islands, the British Virgin Islands, from which the challenges of which I think we can derive direction if we advert to history. If I may read a little excerpt,
Sure.
someone in writing had asked me a couple of years ago, and I responded in writing to that query. And the question was, the question related to basically that, what is there to learn from history? And the question particularly related to regarding financial services. And here's my answer. I said, it seems to me that the BVI's economic success historically has been achieved by adroitly carving out niches in the interstices of the world economy, recently in marine-based tourism, and even more recently as a specialized financial services jurisdiction. The lesson to be learned from the history of monocropism, whether it is King Sugar, tourism, or offshore finance, is the need for perpetual strategic agility and its corollary, innovation, if the BVI is to maintain its position as a major player in the shifting sands of the world economy. And I think that's at the end what history ideally affords us the opportunity to benefit from.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with all that Mike just said. In my own words, what I would say is this. I believe that authenticity is very important. And living today and listening and following, sometimes I shudder at what I hear people saying. I mean, take the 60s and Noel Lloyd. I know we were school children. I remember being in school. And I remember some people who I hear on the media saying that they were part of it. And I know it is impossible for them to have been because we were school children. So I think authenticity is important. It is important that we recognize that we are too much into firsts. The first this and the first that and the first the other. And Mike, you will know this, and you will know this too, Rochelle. Some of us will have memories of similar events having happened before. And we know that what is being touted today as the first is not the first. So history is important. All that Mike has said is important. But it needs to be authentic and truthful to the extent that it can be. I think it's important that all of us recognize that things did not begin when we came on the stage. We are all building on the shoulders of others. And just looking back at some of the lectures which the Frederick Pickering Memorial Foundation has hosted, it is obvious how prescient some of those lectures were. The whole issues with the Constitution, the Commission of Inquiry, governance. Last night I watched on YouTube Jerry Ferrara's lecture of the 17th of February 2023, and straight through to the questions and answers. And a lot of those very things, they were presaged then, and they had been presaged before. And I say that not to detract from anything that Jerry said, but sometimes you're tempted to feel that we're not learning. In fact, it made me think of one of my professors at university, because I read history, Barry Gaspar. I don't know whatever happened to Barry Gaspar. He was from St. Lucia. You learn from history that you don't learn by history. So I think it's important that we continue, that we appreciate the value of history, and that we continue to build on our history and to recognize it and not distort it.
Thank you both. Thank you very much for spending this time with me and sharing all that you have shared. We appreciate it immensely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for including me in this. It's been a great pleasure and a wonderful opportunity. And I wish you very well. I wish the Institute well. And I look forward to this year's Heroes and Forefathers Day.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Ms. Smith. Wonderful opportunity, and proud of you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you both.
Thank you.
So we thank you for joining us in this special broadcast by the Virgin Islands Studies Institute here at the H. Laverty Stout Community College. As we reflect on the insights shared today, we are reminded of the power of legacy, of how vision, service, and leadership continue to shape our communities in lasting ways. We extend our deepest gratitude to Dr. Michael E. O'Neill and Attorney Dancia Penn KC, members of the Frederick Pickering Memorial Foundation, for their contributions and for sharing here with us. On this Heroes and Foreparents Day, may we all be inspired to honor the past, engage with the present, and to help build a future worthy of those who came before us. Until next time, take good care and continue to celebrate the rich heritage of the Virgin Islands. Thank you.